Article 1, Section 8 is a list of the authorities granted to Congress in the original articles. And there are 18 of them. We're almost halfway through them. Each one begins with the word to. This is on page 6 of your pocket constitution. Each one begins with the word to, but that is just a continuation from the first sentence where it says, the Congress shall have power to. So the assumption is that the Congress shall have power always comes before the word to. So just imagine that's what comes first. So, Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. That's the Patent Office, the Copyright Office. Why do you think that's so important? What are we trying to protect here?
Individual rights?
Well, yeah, but what do we call those rights, you know? Intellectual property. We're trying to protect the intellectual property of Americans and American ingenuity. Because, you know, what would happen often is a country would come up with something, another country would grab the idea and take credit for it and all this other stuff.
Did Ben Franklin have anything to do with it? Because he was the inventor.
He was the inventor, I'm sure he did. I don't remember who it was who was arguing for this in Madison's notes. Only because it's been so long ago since I read them, but I'm sure Benjamin Franklin was one of them. I would have no doubt in my mind. Next one, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. What does that mean?
They're better than the Supreme Court?
What's below the Supreme Court? So you've got your circuit courts, you've got your district courts, the federal court system that's below the Supreme Court, that's created by Congress. This is also mentioned again at the beginning of Article 3, that Congress creates the inferior courts. Now, if Congress has the authority to create the inferior courts, then what else do they have the power to do?
Get rid of them.
To dismantle them or to get rid of them. So if you got, let's say, the Ninth Circus misbehaving, Ninth Circuit,
I like it.
if they're misbehaving, Congress can actually dismantle until the judge is tough and absorb it into a different circuit, maybe recreate it later. They can do that if they really wanted to. Problem is, we got a bunch of spineless congressmen.
Yeah.
All right. You remember, it's just it's the same concept as when we were kids, with Dad, right? Dad said, I brought you into this world, boy, and I can take you out of it. Yeah, same thing.
Did the Nuremberg trials?
There's gone and Joanne, by the way.
They were tribunals. Did they ever close them out?
It's never happened.
Yeah. It's
always been expanded. It's never. Mine? It's plugged in because it's almost dead. All right. Sorry, it's been a busy day with it.
It's okay.
All right, next one. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. So, like when the U.S. Navy is out there and we took down these pirates that were boarding ships, the Ethiopian pirates and all that stuff, hey, that's totally constitutional. Well, why is that important? What are we protecting? We're protecting our
commerce,
our trade routes. Because trade with other countries is a very important part of being a union. That's the reason why on the next page, when we get to Army and Navy, you're going to see a difference between the two. I'll get to it in a minute. Now here's the one I couldn't wait to get to, because it always sends shivers up Skip's spine when we talk about this one. To declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. Okay, let's work on this one backwards. Make rules concerning captures on land and water. So, Congress created Gitmo. The prisoners were sent to Gitmo, and we had a particular political party crying, and oh my goodness, that's horrible. How could you do that? You can't do that. Yeah, they can. It says so right here. It's up to Congress, not some civilian court. Okay? Letters of marque and reprisal. What that was in the beginning, our forces and our Navy was very small. We were a third world country when we were a new country. We were a developing country. We were a third world country. We weren't the powerhouse we are now. And in fact, I think the Navy had 2 or 3 vessels. So what you do is you enlist the merchant vessels and and certain mercenaries to be a part of your force, your navy or whatever, and how you do that is you grant them letters of marque and reprisal. They got their little letters that see, I'm representing the government, I get to be navy, little merchant ship. All right, now the first one, declare war. This is a very interesting one, and like I said, sometimes for some people, this thing about war powers just puts people into fits. So we have what's called war powers. And there are two kinds of war powers. There's the power to wage war and the power to declare war. They are different powers from each other according to the Articles of Confederation and the discussions during the convention that Madison took notes on. Under the Articles of Confederation, both of them belong to the legislative body. Only the legislative body could both declare war and wage war. In the Constitution, when you read the language, it's not real clear on what it means, so you have to go back to the arguments and the debates of when they fought over this. But basically, here's what it says. Let's run over to Article 2 real quick, and I'll show you something. So flip the page twice. And it says Section 2 on page 11. It says, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called in actual service to the United States. He's the Commander-in-Chief. In other words, he's the Chief Commander. He's the Chief Commander that can determine if there's troop movement, where they're going to move, what they're going to do, and so on and so forth. All right, so in this case, power to wage war belongs to the President. But it says right here in Article 1, Section 8, I just read it, Congress shall have the power to declare war. So to declare war belongs to Congress. Why would they separate the powers? There are some reasons that it's necessary. For example,
Urgency.
urgency. That's a very good one. Especially back then, because, you know, they didn't have computers, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have cars, weren't going to jump on the motorcycle or the train or jump in a plane to get to Washington, D.C. And if Congress is not in session and the congressmen are in Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, and maybe their home is in Pittsburgh, well, gosh, it could be weeks before Congress shows up. And if we have an urgency, there's a war situation immediately, we have to have a commander-in-chief that could take action immediately. There's another reason. Dennis, who's not here yet, he has a great saying. It says, for God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. The problem sometimes with Congress, if you had to ask Congress permission, is they would take weeks and weeks and weeks to argue about it, and the war would be over by the time they came to a decision. Sometimes you need a chief commander to say, this is what's happening, go do it. But at the same time, there are checks and balances against the president who can wage war. Now, real quick, what's the difference between a declared war and an undeclared war in the sense of international responsibilities and impact? You know what I mean by that? Let me give you an example.
What happened?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking declared and undeclared, and that declared war would be thank you, United Nations.
Actually, we haven't had a declared war since World War II.
Yeah, you're right, sorry.
Yeah, so since 1941, we haven't declared war.
Yeah, right.
Because Korea wasn't declared.
Right.
It was a conflict.
Well, maybe I say that was
Vietnam was a conflict.
beginning of the trend was 1948, or that'd be a better way to put it.
Well, yeah, that's the trend of not declaring wars. Yeah, you could say that. All right, so what's the difference between declared war and not declared war in the sense of international responsibilities and impact?
Declared was approved by Congress, right?
Okay, declared war, yeah, the declaration of war comes from Congress, so it's a formal declaration that goes out to all governments, saying, hey, everybody, we're formally declaring that we are in a state of war. And now you know. So if you get into the war zone, it's nobody's fault but your own, because we declared it. So if, let's say we have, ship A and ship B, shooting at each other with their cannons, right? Because they're, again, these two countries, they're in a declared war, and ship C from some other country gets into the line of fire and gets sunk. Tough. We declared war. You knew we were in a state of war. You knew it was a war zone. But if it's an undeclared war, and Ship C gets in the middle of that battle and gets sunk, that was an act of war against that country, because there was no declared war. That's one of the differences. Another difference would be this. In a declared war, the responsibility lies on the president, both houses of Congress, together. But in an undeclared war, the responsibility is only on the shoulders of the president. He's the one waging war. Congress, they bear no responsibility in that kind of conflict. Now, that said, it is possible for a war to be undeclared, but for Congress to appropriate the funds for the action. So, okay, we approve of it enough, we'll give you the money, but we're not going to declare war. That has happened. Matter of fact, it happened right out the gate. 2 Barbary Wars. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison waged war, the Barbary Wars, against the Barbary pirates. They were not declared wars. But Congress did appropriate the funds, but there was no declaration of war. What had happened, by the way, if you're curious about the Barbary Wars, is the Barbary pirates were corsairs, is the proper name, not really pirates, but everybody calls them pirates. They were corsairs from 4 North African caliphates that considered them a part of the larger Ottoman Empire, which was the Muslim Empire, the Muslim Caliphate. And if you were to travel through waters that they claimed, and you were not Muslim, you either had to pay a tribute, compensation for going through those waters, or you had to engage in a war. It was one or the other. Either you pay us or it's a fight. Up to you. And what was happening is the Muslim vessels would attack the American vessels because we wouldn't pay the tribute, and then enslave the sailors. So under John Adams decided, you know what, okay, fine, we'll start paying an annual tribute. And so Adams and the American government started paying a tribute every year, so that we could go through those waters and not be attacked. Of course, we still get attacked every once in a while because that's what the Muslims do, but for the most part, they left us alone. When Jefferson became president, Jefferson said, I'm not paying that garbage. If we have to bow down to other forces in order to get trade done, then we're not even an independent country. You know, if we're going to be able to trade freely, we need to have a force big enough to protect those trade routes and make sure that we can trade freely. So, Jefferson sent the Marines to the shores of Tripoli. You ever heard the Marine Corps song, Shores of Tripoli? Yeah. You know, leathernecks, you know why they're called leathernecks? They wore these leather collars to protect themselves from being beheaded by the Muslims. That's why they're called leathernecks. Well, I'm sure you knew that.
Yeah, these protect them from the swords.
Yeah, protect them from the swords, because you know where the Muslims are swinging for. All right. So, sent the Marines and the Navy. Marine Corps was part of the Navy. So it cracks me up. See, the Marine Corps and the Army was created by the Constitution. Marine Corps was created in a pub. Always thought that was hilarious. But anyway, of course, later on it was the sailors that were usually in the pub. But anyway, get back to the story here. You've heard of drunken sailors, right? It was not a declared war, though. So when people say, well, no, Doug, it's unconstitutional for the president to go and wage war without approval from Congress, that's not true. Now, that said, especially in today's day and age, because of the technology we have, in some cases, I would prefer that Congress is good with it. If the president feels he needs to wage war, we really don't want a president going around waging war and Congress being upset about it and becoming a tyrant and attacking people and stuff. But there's also a check against that. If a president does decide to do that, if he decides to abuse that power to wage war, there are checks against it. For one, Congress will say, well, you're not getting any money for it. No money, no war. No appropriation of funding, no war. And that goes back to something that I told you guys a few weeks ago about in Article 1, or Article 1, Section 7, where it gave the House the power of the purse strings. It really gave the people the power to stop a war if they didn't like it. Because remember, the Senate was, the senators were appointed by the state legislatures, the voice of the state, the voice of the people with the House, and any bills that has to do with money starts in the House. So that means the voice of the people can say, you know, we don't like this war, we're starving it of funds. So people really have the ultimate power when it comes to war, if their representatives are doing what the people want. Of course, that's a whole different conversation, isn't it? All right. So when the president goes and does something, so says, oh no, he's illegal, he can't do that without Congress approval. Full pucky, he could. Now, whether or not he should have, that's a different discussion. But technically, constitutionally, he can. It's not an illegal war.
It's on his shoulders.
But it's on his shoulders. His responsibility. So, for example, Iraq, and who got the blame? Bush. Well, it was undeclared, so that's where the blame lay, if blame was deserved. Personally, I'm the kind of guy when it comes to military operations, and I was talking to someone about this yesterday, young man who's 21 asking me about this stuff, and I told him, well, when it came to that war, I think what should happen is go in there, hit military targets, make them squeal like pigs, and then leave. Be done with it. And I think it was a mistake to try to overthrow a regime, because more often than not, if you get rid of a dictator, someone worse comes in behind him. And that's exactly what happened. I would rather have a secular Muslim dictator who doesn't follow the Quran and rules with an iron fist than the Muslim Brotherhood in charge.
Gaddafi.
Yeah, Gaddafi is a good example. We actually worked for decades to get Gaddafi to start working with us. He finally said, okay, I'm gonna start working with you, I'll back down on this, and we'll start getting some information. And then Obama had him killed. It screwed up 30 years of work. That's just me. All right, now, so Congress can declare war. The president can wage war. There is another check against the president if he's abusing that power. What's the other check? If Congress doesn't like it. We hear it all the time from Maxine Waters.
Impeachment.
Impeach.
Impeach 45.
Impeach 45. Impeach. But yeah, Congress can impeach the president if he's abusing those powers.
She should have been impeach 44.
Well, and somehow he won a second election too.
Well, this one's going to too.
Yeah. Well, this one's going to too. Yeah, I think so too. All right. Any questions about war powers? Make sense? Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean the president always should do some things he does, but technically, constitutionally, he can. He's commander-in-chief. Okay? When we get to Article 2, I'll go a little bit more into detail about being commander-in-chief in the sense of over the militias too, because if you notice when I read that, it wasn't just over the Army and the Navy, but it said over the militias when they're called into the actual service of the United States government. So, I'll go over that when we get to Article 2.
But the militias look down upon. The militia is looked down upon today.
Well, because people think when you say militia, that's those, bunch of, big hairy rednecks that live up in Michigan, and have lots of ammo. That's not, the militia, the state militia is actually the state's defense force. And 24 of the states do have state militias. California has state militia.
Yeah.
I know 2 people who are part of the state militia.
They're going to change the name from state militia.
So like state defense force or
Yeah,
something?
defense force for that, because I was talking to one a couple years ago, about 2 years ago, and he asked me, he goes, you want to join? I go, nah, I have a stroke, and all this and that, but he was saying that because of the negativity with militias.
Yeah, well, and see, I disagree that we need to change the name, because here's my frustration. It's the left that gave militia a bad name. So every time they give a word a bad name, we're supposed to change the word. We're going to be changing the word every 2 years.
Yeah.
Or faster.
6 months.
Every 6 minutes. With these knuckleheads. Because they're always just, remember when we talked about the word regulate? We talked, what about the word liberal? Word liberal used to mean something different. The word federalist meant something, and they screwed that up too, the left did.
Well, I've heard from our new indoctrination Common Core, if you belong to militia, you have a right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah, I'm part of a group called Truth in Textbooks, and actually a textbook said that. It said that that Americans have the right to keep and bear arms if they are a member of an approved militia.
If,
An approved militia?
That's
if,
what they wished it said.
It's what they wish it said. And in their opinion, an approved militia is the military and the police.
Yeah.
And I say, yeah, let's only let the police and military have the guns and citizens have them. What could go wrong?
Wait.
everything.
Well, that goes back to my discussion with an Antifa member one time when I was at UCR, and it kind of got in his face, and he's wearing a shirt that said Trump is a fascist. I turned to him, I said, so Trump's a fascist? Yeah, Trump's a fascist. That's a picture for gun control too. He says, yeah, take away all the guns. And I said, so you want the fascist government to take away everybody's guns? He went, they don't think very deeply.
Yeah.
Good on talking points.
Yeah, okay, so if Trump's a fascist, the fascist government, the only ones with the guns, yeah, what could go wrong? That's the Jews that have tattoos of numbers on their arm. That's them what could go wrong. I know a woman who was in a concentration camp, and she was a Christian in Hungary. And she said because Hungary had been a part of the Austria-Hungary Empire in World War I, and they were aligned with Germany in World War I. After World War I, they'd all been disarmed. So when the Nazis came later into Hungary, and they were all disarmed, there was no fight. The Nazis easily took over Austria and Hungary because they were not armed. They couldn't fight back.
They didn't, the only country they didn't invade was Switzerland in it?
Yeah, Switzerland said they were neutral and everybody was happy about it because they were armed to the teeth anyway.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to mess with them. And then Spain was kind of neutral, they had just fought they've been through a number of civil wars, and the Marxists were kind of in control, and also there was a Muslim contingent. It was kind of a mess in Spain. Spain was kind of neutral too. But anyway, all right, let's move on. Continue through Article 1, Section 8. Got to the bottom of the page. All right, why am I not finding my page here? There we go. Top of the page 7. Remember I said there's a difference between the Army and the Navy in the Constitution? Okay, here we go. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Provide and maintain the Navy. No limit on the appropriation. But on the Army, there's a 2-year limit. Every 2 years, the apportionment has to be redone. Has to be redecided, reapproved. What? Well, first of all, remember, the apportionment comes from the voice of the people. So if people were afraid of this army, they don't give it money. That's part of it. Why? Because the people and the founders feared the government using a standing army against the people. Therefore, the option of every 2 years of pulling the funds for funding is made available. But the Navy, let me get myself a drink. But the Navy, there's no limit. It just says provide, maintain a Navy. There's no limit on the apportionment. It's continually paid for. So now, those of us under the Department of Navy would say, well, it's because the Navy is much more important than the Army. And then all my Army friends will want to slap me upside the head, and then we start, then we start into our giving each other garbage thing. But really, why? Well, why is Navy unlimited here with the Army every 2 years? What?
Were they not to go abroad because they were Navy? It wasn't so much.
Yeah, you don't have fear of the sailors turning on the people, right? They're out there taking care of
Defending your
routes and
borders.
maritime and all, and that's very important. What's the old saying about he who controls the seas? Right? If you control the seas, you control the world.
But Navy still pops up all around. They're in Corona, they're in Carson City, all these weird places, naval.
Well, we gotta have some place to, like store ammunition and have training facilities and, stuff like that.
The ships need to be cleaned ever so often.
You don't take them to Corona.
Ships trust me, I was in the Navy. Ships get cleaned constantly. There's a field day almost all the time. And you know what I mean by field day. All right. Moment they think you got nothing to do, you're cleaning. So keep busy.
Back in our day, there's chip and red lead.
Chip and red lead.
Yeah.
Well, the Marine Corps and the Navy, you know, some of the terms have the same meaning, some of them are different. For example, field day means the same thing. A scuttlebutt is the same thing. A mess deck is the same thing. But general quarters is different. See, general quarters to the Navy is it's time to go to work, it's time to play war, whatever. General quarters to the Marine Corps means get out of the way and hit the rack. So, anyway, all right. To make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. What is that? For those of you that have served in the military, you should know. The UCMJ, that is the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, the UCMJ, is by Congress. Let me rephrase that. When you get into the United States military, you take an oath to protect and defend this Constitution, but you are no longer protected by it. You don't have freedom of speech. Trust me. Try talking back to a DI and tell them you have freedom of speech. It ain't gonna work. Your Constitution, when you're in the military, is the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This provision I just read gives Congress the authority to create.
Evidently, Bill Clinton didn't read it.
Don't get me started. You don't want me to start doing Clinton jokes, because this is a G-rated, film. Start talking about Clinton, it becomes a rated R really fast. All right, sorry I'm sitting, I'm getting tired. Am I still on camera?
You sort of. I'm
Sort
gonna
of?
fix it.
All right.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
All right, to provide for calling forth the militia, executing the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, or repel invasions. So the Congress shall have power to provide for calling forth the militia. Let's go back to Article 2. We read it earlier. 2 pages. Flip over 2 pages to page 11. President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. Who calls the militia into the actual service of the United States? We just read it. Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia, and then it gives you the reasons, to execute the laws of the Union. Okay, so remember when the militia or the National Guard was sent to Arkansas to make sure that the racial integration in the schools is working out? Actually, it was allowed to execute the laws of the Union. Suppress insurrections. I would say also to take care of, what was it say in Article 4, the exact wording, domestic violence, take care of domestic violence. I would say that also, like, Watts riots, National Guard brought in, okay, Rodney King riot, same thing. And repel invasion. Someone says, well, Doug, it's not legal for the government to put the National Guard on the border. Yeah, it is. It says right here that Congress can call forth the militia to repel invasions. Is that not an invasion at the border?
I don't know what else you'd call it.
Don't know what else you'd call it. Now here's the thing. We've got these governors saying, well, I'm not going to send my National Guard there. It wasn't their choice when it comes to repelling invasions. It's Congress's choice. It says here, Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Now, the state can call forward their militia or the National Guard, which is considered a militia according to the U.S. Code. But if it's not called forth by the state has no say in it. If the militia, the National Guard, is called forth by the Congress, then the president is the commander-in-chief, not the governor. When we get to the end of Article 1, Section 10, we'll get into the governor, what he's allowed to do with the militia. But I've got a friend of mine who's in the National Guard, and when it's called up by the state, like for sandbags, because of a storm coming in or something like that, his paycheck comes from the state. When he gets called up by Congress, his paycheck comes from the federal government. If the Congress calls up the National Guard, the Governor Brown can't say, I'm not sending my militia. It's not yours to say you're not going to send. Congress called them up. You're not the commander-in-chief. The president is. When they are in the actual service of the United States. If they're called up by Congress, they are in the actual service of the United States. Therefore, the president is the commander-in-chief Make sense? Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Because when you know what I'm talking about, right? With the border, and Trump's talking about the Oregon governor and Governor Brown of California. So I'm not going to send my National Guard. That's not your decision. Congress and Trump is calling them up. By the federal government, Trump is the commander in chief, not the governor. So shut up and let the National Guard walk by. Says so right here. I just read it to you. All right. To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So let's stop right there and go over the Second Amendment. Who is the militia? National Guard is one part of it. There's a naval militia. There's a state militia. But then there is a part of the militia that the U.S. Code recognizes called the unorganized militia. Who is the unorganized militia? I'm looking at them. You guys are. All of us are. Every citizen is a part of the unorganized militia. And the U.S. Code does recognize that an unorganized militia exists. Now,
They don't want you to know that.
I know that, and you know that, but now I want to make sure everybody understands we're all a part of the militia. Now, Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let me rephrase this. Because we need a well-regulated militia available for defense of these states, and everybody is a part of that militia, everybody has a right to keep and bear arms. Because if we need you, you need to be armed. But you also need to be well-regulated if you're part of the state militia or part of the militia, organized militia. What is a well-regulated militia? It goes back to the word regulated. We were talking about that a few weeks ago, right? Regulated does not mean to control or restrict by rule of law of the government.
It means to keep in good order.
Put it in good order. Keep in good order. A well-regulated militia is a militia that's in good order. We're properly equipped. Got some training. We can hit the broadside of a barn. We're wearing socks. A well-regulated militia. A militia that's in good order. Now, how do you make sure that the state militia is in good order? Now we go back to Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power to organize for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, the state militia, the organized militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. Because the militia can serve the state and the United States. Congress sets up the rules, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia. It's up to the state to take care of the nitty-gritty, in other words, of their state militia. And the authority of training of the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Congress sets the rules, state does it. Because we need a militia that's in good order, we all have a right to keep and bear arms, and the organized part of that militia, the well-regulated part of that, Congress establishes the rules and the state makes sure it happens. Now, if we got in a situation where the unorganized militia went into action, the state militia would be our superiors, our hierarchy. Their training would then be handed down to us to make sure we march in a straight line too. We know how to shoot. Judy, you ready to start shooting?
Oh,
Protect my property. Chris said he's gonna put dead bodies in the front. And then
Like
he
in
says,
movie
and when
300,
they come, he
wall
goes,
of dead bodies.
they're gonna skip our house, cause they're gonna be dead bodies there. They're gonna say, I don't wanna go to this
I
house.
won't mess with those guys.
Oh.
what is an arm? It could be.
No, that's a very good question. What is an arm? The 1828 Webster's Dictionary says that, in one of its definitions, that it is a firearm or a weapon such as a sword, and it goes on with examples. What about bear? What does bear mean?
possess, I would think,
To possess, to own, to have.
Yeah.
And then in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, which is the first American dictionary, it also says, or to keep, like keeping under a coat. So to bear is also concealed carry, brother.
You know, that's, when did they change it in the dictionaries? Cause I don't think it says the same thing in the new ones.
Talk to the liberals, they probably know when.
But it doesn't say that today, if
No,
you
it
look
doesn't.
up in your dictionary
Well, it
today.
goes back to the word regulating. We talked about this a few weeks ago in this class. The number one definition of regulate today is to control or restrict by rule of law. That was the least used definition in 1828. Well, the reason I go to 1828 is that was the first dictionary. Before that, Noah Webster had what was called spellers. And his spellers were so popular, and he saw the need of creating a dictionary, that he created a dictionary in 1828. But those definitions were based on the definitions that were commonly understood by the people of the time of the writing of this. That's why the 1828 Webster's Dictionary is the one I go to. And it's available online too, by the way, believe it or not, and it is accurate. So I used to have the hard copy, but I don't anymore. I let someone borrow it and never came back.
You need pack belt just to carry it anyway.
Yeah, no kidding, man. That thing's like this. You think the collegiate dictionary is a big thing? They're nothing compared to Webster's original 1828 dictionary. But anyway, back then though, to control by rule of law was the least common definition. The most common was flow and weights and measures, and the second most common was to put in good order. Today's dictionary has put in good order as the last and least used. And when you apply regulate to the three places that applies in the Constitution, to change the definition today, well-regulated militia is one that's controlled by the government. Well, they're basing it on today's definition. That's not what a well-regulated militia is. A well-regulated militia is the one that's in good order. Which makes a lot of sense when you consider the Revolutionary War. The militia, man, they weren't very good shots. They were marching in different directions. A lot of them didn't have socks. Martha Washington was known for darning socks. That's what one thing she was known for. Because it was not a well-regulated militia. It was a bunch of farmers and store owners and lawyers and doctors who couldn't shoot a cow if it was 3 feet in front of them. And yet somehow, because of the brilliance of George Washington, and because it was on our own turf and we could play some guerrilla warfare, pop shots behind trees, stuff like that, we won. We really didn't win. We outlasted them. And they finally threw up their hands and said, this is ridiculous, I'm out of here. That's what really would happen.
So we'll organize militia, would have arms, would have everything
Be
they
well
need.
equipped, be trained, have a uniform. State militia is what it's referring to, but because that's necessary, and all of us are really part of the militia, we all need to be armed. That's what it's saying.
So,
Did they
yes.
use,
Yes.
kids to help the militia? Did they use kids?
Sometimes. Of course, a 14-year-old boy wasn't considered a kid, was he? He was a young man.
command a ship. Well, it's banging in my head. What was Posse Comitatus and what came later?
Posse Comitatus came in the 1890s, and part of the reason was this was after the Reconstruction period, and the fear was what had happened in the South by the North, where they sent troops in and military governorships to really control the South, was very dangerous. And by the 1890s, they never wanted to see that again, so they passed Posse Comitatus. And basically, Posse Comitatus is a law that disallows the federal government from using the military against their own people. Now, when we talked about the National Guard being used at the border, a few of the Democrats would say, oh, Posse Comitatus. We're not using the National Guard against Americans. And they say, well, we're all Americans. No.
Come on in.
Those knuckleheads crossing the border without going through the vetting process are not Americans. They are part of an invasion force. Posse Comitatus does not apply. And I wrote an article, matter of fact, the other day, because I really wanted to get those who were doubters to really think about it. And I basically said, you know what? I don't know what percentage of illegal aliens are sick. I don't know what percentage of them are criminals or rapists or jihadists or drug runners or gang members. I don't know if it's 0.5%, 1%, 5%, 10%, 50%. But whatever that percentage is, the reality is those people exist in that population. There may be plenty of people who just want to come here for a better life. But they're mixed into that population are people who mean us harm. We don't lock our doors of our house because we hate everybody on the outside. We lock our doors because we love everybody on the inside. Even when someone knocks on our door, we peek out to make sure and we vet them before we let them in. And if someone breaks into our window, we don't automatically make them a member of the family.
No?
Because, you know, they just want better life.
You make them blood brothers, let them bleed a little bit. Bingo, the blood.
So it's just common sense that you have an immigration system that vets who's coming in. Besides, you ever heard of ever heard the term too much of a good thing? We don't have too much of a good thing. We have finite resources. We can only handle so many people. Enough people start getting in the boat's gonna start to sink. And I don't want just anybody coming into the boat. I want people who know how to repair the boat. So when it starts to sink, they can help fix it. That's just me. All right. Enough about militias. Any questions about militias or immigration that I touched on? When we get to Article 1, Section 9, we'll talk about immigration again.
I think it needs to be clearly understood, and I think it's not,
Immigration?
all of it.
When we get to Article 1, Section 9, I'm gonna slam immigration down on the floor like with a DDT and knock it out.
As well as the militia, I don't think enough,
People understand that?
yeah. I think it's really misunderstood,
Well,
big time.
we can resolve that misunderstanding with one quote. Admiral Yamamoto of Japan, who said, "Do not invade mainland America. There will be a gun behind every blade of grass." Japan did not attack the mainland during World War II because they knew that we were armed. That alone should be convincing enough,
You would think.
you would think.
We had John Wayne then.
We had John Wayne
Now
back
we got
then.
Chuck Schumer.
Granny Judge Schumer.
I saw a meme of a bunch of guys in camo, rifles, and all sort of stuff. On one side of the meme picture, and the other side of the picture was a bunch of rainbow metrosexual looking girly boys. And it says at the top, they say there's gonna be a civil war. I'm not worried. I've seen what the other side looks like. That's why they want to disarm us. Here's the
They're gonna
thing.
be banned.
How many arms and how much ammo is there? Yeah, you're gonna lose so many subscribers now, and all the gay ones, but you know.
Don't know.
You're not worried about that. How many? Do you know how many guns and how much ammo is out there in public? I can't remember the numbers now, but it's like, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of rounds, you know, all this other stuff. Well, if we were a problem, wouldn't they know it? With that much stuff out there?
Would think so.
And if guns kill people, wouldn't gun shows be the most dangerous place to be?
On the earth.
I remember there was this restaurant in Louisiana who the owner was giving a discount to anybody who was armed. Show your piece, you got a 10% discount. CBS reporter shows up and she says to the owner, "Aren't you worried about having all these dangerous people in here with guns?" He says, "What are you talking about? This is the safest restaurant in Louisiana."
That's right.
That happened to my brother-in-law. He went to a place and he gave everybody a 10% discount. And new manager came in and says, "No more discount, no more nothing." And they left. They robbed him 2 times in that week. And he said, 10% discount to all police and officers in
And
there.
nothing back.
And everything right after that.
That happened in San Francisco. There was a coffee shop, and the liberal owner decided that they didn't want the toxic masculinity of police officers in the place. So word went out that they were no longer serving police, and they got robbed 3 times. Yeah. So yeah,
What is the only place that has never been robbed?
the only place that's never been robbed, a gun store,
No, donut shop.
donut shop. Yeah, donut shops. Yeah, that's another one. All right. All right, but we digress. Let's get moving here.
Yeah.
All right, to exercise this is halfway down page 7. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as made by a session of particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States. What district are they talking about?
Building a swamp.
The swamp,
DC.
the cesspool. 2 states ceded that property, Maryland and Virginia. Think they gave them the good land?
Wasn't it Jefferson's?
John Adams hated Washington, D.C. He called it a mosquito-infested swamp. Boy, he was right.
That's why the turtle looks.
They say, and some people tell me this is just a conspiracy theory, but they say that the ground is so soft underneath Washington, D.C. that D.C. is actually sinking. It really is a cesspool, apparently. But anyway, okay, so what this is saying is all legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, Congress. So why do they have a mayor and a city council? Because Congress lets them. Congress is supposed to be in control of Washington, D.C. And it says seat of government of the United States. In other words, it's not supposed to be a city with residents. It's a seat of government. The only people there are supposed to be the people that are working. They're not supposed to be living there. There's not supposed to be any residents. It is the seat of government. John Adams and Jefferson thought it would be a commercial center also. But it's not supposed to have a population. Why does it? What happened?
Democrats.
Well,
Oh,
yeah, sort of. Yeah.
Because of the war between the states, there, the Northern Aggression War after.
All right. Washington, D.C. outlawed slavery before the states around it did. Maryland, Delaware were still slave states when Washington, D.C. they abolished slavery in Washington, D.C. So you're a slave and you've just escaped, I don't know, Virginia or North Carolina, and you're working your way to the north, and you get to Washington, D.C., and between you and the other northern states where slavery's been abolished is slave state Maryland and slave state Delaware. You know, it might be a good idea to stay in Washington, D.C. It's free. And besides, they need lots of workers. They need people to polish their shoes and to clean the hotel rooms and do the toilets and all this sort of stuff. Which is the answer to the question that Democrats ask about, illegal aliens, well, who's going to clean your toilets in the hotels? Well, the people did before. Problem is now they're all on welfare. Because the illegal aliens took all their jobs.
Yeah, thanks to Franklin D. Roosevelt.
All right, so that's also why Washington, D.C. has always had a black population. They are literally the descendants of escaped slaves. Okay? So, Congress has the authority to exercise all legislation over the District of Columbia. Then it says, and to exercise like authority, so in other words, they got the same authority, all legislative authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. All right, let me tell you what we just said. What we just said is the federal government, territories or bases or whatever, can only own land if it's purchased with the consent of the state legislatures
Thanks for being here.
for the purpose of needful buildings.
Well, they forgot that part of the Constitution.
All right, so let's go back to the Bundy Ranch. All that land that the federal government owns around the Bundy Ranch, and the cows are feeding on it, and they said, well, we hang on to that land because of some type of turtle. Last time I checked, a turtle was not a needful building. And a lot of that land, they didn't purchase with the state consent.
They just took it.
They took it and said, hey, you want to become a state? We're hanging on to this land. What about national parks?
The Chinese own them.
Are national parks purchased with the consent of the state legislature of the state it's in for the purpose of needful buildings.
Whoops.
No, technically national parks are unconstitutional.
So,
Don't tell your tree huggers that, they might, they may start crying, but you know how metrosexuals are, they cry very easily.
You have to have a safe space coloring book.
You gotta have a safe space for the rainbow flag. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the reason why Jefferson was so upset about the Louisiana Purchase. Technically, it would have.
Sorry for all the movement, folks.
It wasn't for the federal government to purchase Louisiana territory. It was for the states each to do it, and to divvy it up between themselves. That's what was supposed to happen, but they didn't have the money, and they really didn't have the desire, and it was a really good deal. Napoleon needed the money, and Jefferson would love to double the size of the United States. When we get to we gotta get to another place in the Constitution where we'll really go into detail about that. I'm not gonna tell you the whole story yet. I'm gonna leave you hanging on that one. All right, finally, the last clause in Article 1, Section
My
8.
battery was dying.
Congress shall have the authority or the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, in other words, the ones we just went through, foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution. In other words, Congress is only supposed to make laws that are vested by this Constitution, either foregoing or by amendment later. In the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Necessary and proper. It must be necessary, it must be proper, because in order to be proper, it has to be constitutionally authorized. Now, we've got a class of anti-constitutional leftists, whatevers, who say, well, yeah, but Doug, what about implied powers? These are powers that are assumed and be implied by the Constitution, but are not necessarily expressly given. But they're necessary and proper. They use that clause.
Did they misuse that clause?
They misuse that clause. It started with Alexander Hamilton. He used that to create the first central bank. Skip, that's exactly the response I expected, right? And George Washington signed the act for the first bank of the United States reluctantly, but he did. And it was so unconstitutional. Well, no, implied powers, Doug. Well, and Jefferson said that if you can say that there are implied powers, you can get the Constitution to imply anything you want. And Jefferson was right.
Out of context.
Give you another example. Remember Article 1, Section 8, we talked about the establishment of post offices? There's nothing in there that gives the federal government the authority to heavily regulate private industry. But they heavily regulate FedEx and UPS and those guys. Why? Well, because it's implied, because they're doing the work that would normally be done by the post office. And since we have authority over the post office, we have authority over any company that does work like the post office. That's the excuse. It's implied. Don't you know, Doug? But it's not expressly enumerated. It's a BS regulation.
Well, I can say it's implied that I have a 50 caliber on top of my house too.
Yeah, well, it's implied, yeah.
I like that one.
Well, I tell everybody that if a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, and so therefore we all have the right to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed, and the reason for that is because we have to be able to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. We should then therefore have the same or more firepower, the same or greater firepower than the government that we must protect ourselves from, correct?
Yeah,
I want a tank for Christmas,
there you go.
An apron.
Space weapons.
and a rocket launcher,
Yeah.
and a Gatling.
About 20 claymores.
Nuclear bomb.
No, that's too late. Hillary already sold all the uranium.
Yeah.
Well, 20% of it. All right.
gonna wish big.
Article 1, Section 9 next week. We're gonna hammer into immigration next week. The immigration and slavery, top two. I joked about the traffic was bad, and I said, watch, Dennis is gonna show up right when we're finishing. Sure enough.
Better late than never.
Made it.
You know, I wanted to make you look pathetic.
But if you're here, you're on time.
Well, yeah, but you got us to double digits, so it was only 9 students. Now that you showed up in the nick of time, we had 10. Double
I
digits.
drove in like all the cars, and I thought, hey.
Thank you, Scott, for being here.
We got a decent
Nathan
crowd
and everybody
tonight.
else.
Partly thanks to Ken, because he brought a couple of friends. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, friends, for coming. Who was it, Joe?
Yep.
And Danielle. And Danielle is so talkative, so just, you know, if she talks your ear off, let me know. Oh, she does a smile. All right, so next week, Article 1, Section 9, we're gonna hammer into immigration and slavery. Then, we're gonna get into prohibitions against the federal government. And that's interesting. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns?
Any questions, comments?
That includes for the people watching.
Thank you for being here, Scott. Next year, slavery and immigration.
Yeah, we'll be here, I
Article
apologize,
1,
last
Section
week,
9.
The meeting with the Heritage Foundation kind of came up on me quickly. I am a part of.
Thank you, Nathan.
The Heritage Foundation. I'm a sentinel for the Heritage Foundation, and my local representative who's in Arizona wanted to meet with me and some of the other sentinels. And I'm actually in this region, the longest standing sentinel now. I'm like the highest ranking sentinel, whatever, so I really needed to be there. And he just so happened to pick Tuesday night. And so, oh yeah, bucket, thank you. I forgot about the bucket. This is a free class, but if you can help with some money, you can. If you can't, don't worry about it.
You mean donations? You mean donation words?
I appreciate, well, contributions.
Contribution.
Because I can't say donations, because technically I'm not a nonprofit, and Constitution Association, which is a nonprofit, this
Thank you,
money's going
Nathan.
to them, it's going to me. But you guys are my gas money. So I will say that.
I'm glad I can help with the gas.
Yeah, I tell you what, the Banning Beaumont Cherry Valley Tea Party kind of came through last Thursday too, kind of helped me, which was a good thing, because I got some car expenses just came up, so they took care of my car expenses. Yeah, I tell you, well, the Banning Beaumont Cherry Valley Tea Party's awesome.
Do I need to call the land, because I need a brake job, so.
Yeah, actually, Glenn is out sick. Anyway, all right, good to see you guys. We'll see you next week right here. Same bat channel, same bat location. There's a couple people that didn't make it tonight, but the rest of you, I'm glad you made it. Glad to see you too. Glad you made it in. We'll go grab my tea. I got a few things we can talk about. Of course, I'm gonna eat very light because I ate at Hometown Buffet before I got here.
Okay, everybody, thanks for being here. Sorry for all the movement. My battery was dying. Next week, immigration and slavery, Article 1, Section 9. And thanks everyone for being here. Nathan for staying here. Scott, and I'm not sure who the third person is that's in here at the moment. I don't want to miss anybody. I don't have internet right now. I don't have any phone service. And so I'm doing this because I'm on Wi-Fi. Just to let everybody know. Hopefully here in the next few days. I got car trouble, I've got to rebuild my motor, just a whole bunch of stuff going on, and I got to get back on Metro PCS because Boost isn't working. All right, so we're out of here. Thanks again for being here. God bless. Take care. We're just keeping it real. Bye for now, and never give up, because there's always a way. Always. God bless. Bye for now, and thanks for being here. Bye. Catch you on the rebound, Scott. You too, Nathan. Soon.